There was a moment in my life when a lesson that cost only 50 cents changed everything I thought I knew about success and growth. It wasn't a complicated idea or a big secret. It was simple and clear, but it shook me to my core. That lesson forced me to face hard truths about myself, my habits, and my choices. It showed me that real change starts with taking responsibility and making a promise to do better every day. In this video, you're going to hear exactly what I learned and how that small moment set me on a path that transformed my future. If you're ready to stop making excuses and start creating the life you want, this story will give you the push you need. Keep watching, because this lesson is more powerful than you might expect, and it can change your life too. Let's get started. Number 1. I refuse to lie to myself ever again. There was a time when I looked like I had things under control, but deep down, I was lost. I was 25 years old, and I had nothing to show for my effort. I wasn't lazy. I was working. But I was working without direction. I wasn't producing results. And I kept telling myself stories to survive each day. I kept saying I was doing my best. I kept saying things would eventually turn around. But the truth is, I wasn't changing anything. I wasn't learning. I wasn't growing. I was just passing time and trying to feel okay about it. That was the lie. I didn't want to face the truth about where I was and what I wasn't doing. But life doesn't reward denial. Life waits for honesty. And one day I came face to face with that. I had 50 cents in my pocket. That was all I had. And on that day, I ran into a little girl selling cookies. She asked me if I'd like to buy a box. I didn't even have a full dollar. I couldn't help her. But instead of telling her the truth, I said something that stayed with me for the rest of my life. I told her I already bought some. That was a lie. It was a small lie. But it came from a deep place. It came from shame. I didn't want her to know I was broke. I didn't want her to see the truth about me. But when I walked away, I realized I had been lying to someone far more important. I had been lying to myself for years. That moment hit me hard. Not because I didn't have money. That wasn't the real issue. The real issue was I didn't have honesty. I had been telling myself that I was doing fine, that I was giving it everything, that I had time, that it wasn't my fault. But now I couldn't escape what I felt. I couldn't hide behind those stories anymore. I felt the weight of my own neglect. I wasn't taking control of my life. I wasn't setting standards. I wasn't becoming someone better. I was drifting, and I knew in that moment that if I kept going like that, I would stay broke. Not just broke financially, broke mentally, broke emotionally, broke in discipline, broke in belief. That night I made a decision. I would never lie to myself again. Not about my effort, not about my habits, not about my priorities, not about my goals. I was going to be honest with myself, even if the truth was hard. I realized that was the only way to build something real. You can't lie your way into a better life. You can't fake growth. You can't pretend your way into strength. You either face the truth, or you stay stuck in excuses. From that point forward, I started asking myself real questions. Am I really doing my best? Or am I just staying busy? Am I really investing in myself? Or am I wasting time? Am I reading books? Or just watching others win? Am I taking responsibility? Or just hoping things change? These questions helped me face the man in the mirror. And every time I answered truthfully, I got better. Slowly, steadily, truth by truth, step by step. I began to track how I spent my time. I started measuring where my money went. I began to cut out distractions. I reduced the hours I spent around people who made me feel comfortable with being average. I paid more attention to my environment. I started reading books from people who had built something with their lives. I stopped pretending I had time to waste. I stopped saying someday and started living like the clock was ticking. I stopped playing it safe. I stopped giving myself a way out. That decision, to be honest, made me more focused than ever. Most people never change because they keep lying to themselves. They say they want more, but their actions don't reflect it. They say they'll start tomorrow, but tomorrow turns into next year. They say they're doing everything they can, but deep down they know they're holding back. And I know what that feels like, because I lived there. I lived in that place where excuses feel easier than effort, where comfort feels safer than growth. But there's no power in pretending. There's no reward in deception. The only way forward is to face the truth. When I started to live by truth, things began to shift. I started building confidence, not because I had all the answers, but because I was being real. I started believing in myself, not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally doing the right things. I started to earn more. I started to think differently. I started to rise because I had a foundation that was strong. And that foundation was built on honesty. That little moment with 50 cents and that little girl did something big inside of me. It made me confront who I was becoming. It made me ask why I was settling. It made me feel the gap between who I was and who I could be. And I promised myself I would never feel that shame again. Not because life would get easier, but because I would get better. I would raise my standards. I would hold myself accountable. I would live with integrity, whether anyone was watching or not. You don't need a big disaster to change your life. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet moment where you finally admit you're not being honest with yourself. That's the moment that opens the door to real growth. That's the moment when everything begins to turn around. Not when you impress others, not when you make more money, but when you can finally look yourself in the eyes and say, I'm being real and I'm taking charge. I still think about that 50 cents. It reminds me how far I've come. It reminds me that change starts in the smallest moment. It reminds me that self-respect comes from truth, not from success, not from applause, but from the simple act of refusing to lie to yourself. Every time you choose truth, you become stronger. Every time you hold yourself to a higher standard, you become someone you can respect. And that is the foundation of a powerful life. Number 2, I decided I would never be broke again. There came a day when I was tired of struggling. I was tired of having to count coins in my pocket. I was tired of feeling embarrassed when someone asked me to contribute or invest or participate. I was tired of being the one who always had to say no because I simply didn't have the money. I realized I had spent too much time getting by and not enough time building something. I had dreams. I had desires. But my bank account told a different story. That story was empty. That story was full of delay and hesitation. That story had nothing to do with who I wanted to become. I knew deep down I was capable of more. But until I made a firm decision, nothing would change. It wasn't about greed or chasing luxury. It was about freedom. It was about having options. It was about taking care of my responsibilities without fear. I wanted to be the person who could give without hesitation. I wanted to be the one who could provide when others couldn't. I didn't want to live under pressure anymore. I didn't want to avoid phone calls. I didn't want to keep apologizing to myself for the life I wasn't living. I made a quiet but solid decision that I would never be broke again. Not just in money. I meant I would never be mentally broke, emotionally broke, or spiritually broke again. I would not allow lack to rule my life anymore. That decision didn't mean money would suddenly fall into my hands. It meant I had to grow. It meant I had to understand how money worked. It meant I had to change my habits and learn new ones. I stopped spending to feel better. I stopped chasing pleasure and started building value. I read books on finance. I studied people who had created real wealth. I didn't just want to have money. I wanted to be the kind of person who could attract it, manage it, and multiply it. That kind of thinking requires discipline. It requires honesty, and it requires consistency. I started tracking every single dollar. Not because I was obsessed with numbers, but because I wanted to be fully responsible. I stopped ignoring my financial reality. I looked at the truth and decided to face it, not run from it. I made tough decisions. I said no to short-term fun. I said no to distractions. I used that time and energy to build something better. I started saving, even when it felt like I had nothing to save. I built the habit first. I told myself that if I could save $10, I could one day save 10,000. I focused on progress, not perfection. I worked on increasing my value in the marketplace. I learned new skills. I got better at communication. I developed discipline in the way I used my time. I didn't let the day slip by without producing something meaningful. I stopped showing up just to show up. I showed up to make an impact. I looked for ways to contribute more, so I could earn more. I didn't just wait for opportunities, I created them. I found needs and found ways to meet them. I started thinking like a problem solver, not just a worker. There were days I felt tired. There were times I felt like nothing was changing, but I had already made the decision. I wasn't going to turn back. I wasn't going to complain. I wasn't going to give up. Because I understood that being broke was more than a financial condition. It was a mindset. And once I shifted my mindset, the rest started to follow. I began to attract better conversations. I was able to understand how successful people thought, because I had done the work to think at that level. My world started expanding because I was no longer living with the mindset of lack. I eliminated entitlement. I stopped waiting for someone to rescue me. I stopped hoping for shortcuts. I stopped wishing things would just work out. I replaced all of that with responsibility and effort. I knew I had to earn it. I had to build it. I had to deserve it. Every choice I made either brought me closer to financial strength or pushed me further into struggle. I chose wisely, and I chose with intention. I didn't leave it to chance. I began to see that wealth is not just about having more, it's about becoming more. It's about building character, not just building accounts. It's about having integrity when nobody's watching. It's about showing up every day with a clear sense of direction. The man who is disciplined will always have more than the man who only relies on motivation. I didn't wait for inspiration. I made commitments. I didn't let my feelings run the day. I let my decisions lead. When I made the choice to never be broke again, I had to give up the version of myself that accepted being broke as normal. I had to give up the comfort of excuses. I had to let go of the people who didn't want to grow. I had to stop repeating the same habits that kept me stuck. I chose books over TV. I chose early mornings over wasted nights. I chose work that stretched me over tasks that kept me small. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. There were moments I sat alone in silence, wondering if it would pay off. But I kept going because I knew what it felt like to live without options. I knew the pain of seeing an opportunity and not being able to take it. I knew what it was like to watch others rise while I stayed in place. That feeling stayed with me, not as a source of bitterness, but as fuel. I used it to push harder. I used it to remind myself of the promise I made. Every dollar I saved was a win. Every skill I mastered was a step forward. Every time I said no to distractions, I said yes to my future. I wasn't just building income, I was building identity. I was becoming the kind of person who doesn't stay down. I was training myself to be trustworthy with resources. I was preparing for the life I said I wanted. That kind of preparation takes time, but it creates something solid. My decision was personal. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about finally living a life that matched my potential. It was about being ready when opportunity knocked. It was about looking at my family and knowing I could provide. It was about walking into any room and knowing I belonged. I didn't need to flash wealth. I just needed to be free from lack. I needed to be strong in character, rich in knowledge, and prepared for anything. That is what the decision gave me. Number 3. I learned pain is the start of discipline. There are some lessons you don't learn from comfort. Some things only become clear when you're uncomfortable enough to stop pretending. The day I truly started to change wasn't the day someone inspired me with a speech or handed me a new opportunity. It was the day I had to face a pain I couldn't ignore anymore. Not physical pain, but a deeper kind of ache. The kind that comes from disappointment in yourself. The kind that shows up when you know you could have done better, but didn't. When I felt that pain, I realized it wasn't there to destroy me. It was there to wake me up. I used to think I needed motivation to start. I thought I had to feel good to do good. But that belief kept me waiting for the perfect moment. The truth is, I needed pain, not suffering, but awareness. Pain opened my eyes. It showed me the gap between the life I wanted and the one I was living. That discomfort became the push I never gave myself. It was the honest reminder that discipline doesn't come wrapped in ease. It grows out of pressure. It grows out of doing things you don't want to do. Not once, but every day, until it becomes who you are. I remember sitting alone with the weight of my own regret. Not because someone else pointed it out, but because I knew I wasn't showing up for myself. That quiet moment felt heavier than any external failure. I had to ask myself real questions. Where did I waste my time? What choices did I avoid making? Why was I still in the same place after all this time? That process didn't feel good, but it gave me something far more valuable than comfort. It gave me clarity. I realized I had been running from the one thing that would set me free. Discipline. Pain has a way of pointing you toward the truth. It doesn't sugarcoat anything. It tells you straight. It's not there to make you feel better. It's there to remind you of what matters. When I began listening to what my pain was teaching me, I found the beginning of discipline. It started with small steps. Waking up on time, finishing what I started, saying no when I wanted to say yes to the easy path. That's when things slowly started shifting. Every time I chose discipline, it didn't feel natural. It felt forced. But I kept going, not because I liked it, but because I liked who I was becoming. I didn't wait for results to believe in the process. I trusted that the feeling of discomfort was the cost of change, and I paid it willingly, because I had already paid a much higher price in the past by avoiding it. The price of staying the same. The price of watching time pass without progress. The price of knowing I could have done more. The first signs of growth didn't show up in my bank account or in recognition. They showed up in how I handled challenges. They showed up in the way I responded when things didn't go my way. I stopped falling apart under pressure. I stopped quitting when it got hard. I learned how to keep going even when I didn't feel like it. That came from discipline, and discipline was built from the pain I refused to ignore. Most people avoid pain and chase comfort. But that's how you stay average. That's how years go by without real progress. I chose the opposite. I chose to feel the pain fully. And instead of letting it paralyze me, I let it instruct me. I treated it like feedback. It was telling me what needed to change. It was highlighting what I had neglected. It was pushing me toward responsibility. I started managing my time better. Not because I read it in a book, but because I felt the consequences of wasting time. I improved my focus, not because someone told me to, but because I saw how easily distractions were stealing my future. I committed to physical fitness, not for vanity, but because I felt weak and I wanted strength. Pain gave me the emotional fuel to take action. I would have postponed forever. There were days when I was tempted to go back. Days when comfort called louder than purpose. But every time I remembered what it felt like to sit in regret, I got up. I remembered the days when I made excuses and got nothing in return. I remembered the heavy silence of wasted time. And I reminded myself that pain taught me more than pleasure ever did. Discipline became a daily choice. A choice to do what was right, even when it was inconvenient. A choice to prepare instead of hope. A choice to sacrifice the immediate for the future. And every time I made that choice, I built a little more strength. Not the kind of strength people see, but the kind that helps you sleep peacefully. The kind that builds trust in yourself. The kind that becomes your foundation when everything else is uncertain. I used to think life would get easier once I figured things out. But that's not true. Life doesn't get easier. You get stronger. You get clearer. You get more disciplined. And the strength doesn't come from comfort. It comes from showing up when it's hard. From doing what's required, without needing applause. From being consistent when nobody is watching. The discipline I have today was born from the pain I once tried to avoid. That pain showed me what I needed to do. It didn't give me a step-by-step plan. It gave me a reason to begin. And once I began, I realized I didn't need to know everything. I just needed to stay with the process. Every day, one step at a time, one decision at a time. That's how I earned discipline. Pain taught me that growth is not a single moment. It's a series of decisions. It's built in private, far from praise. It's built in quiet moments when you choose progress over comfort. That's when you start to feel proud. Not because life is perfect, but because you know you're no longer running. You're facing the work. You're building the habits. You're choosing the harder path. Because you finally understand that the easy one never leads where you want to go. Number 4, I took full control of my future today. There comes a moment in a person's life when the waiting has to stop. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when it's more convenient, or when everything feels just right. That moment came for me when I looked around and realized I was surrounded by results. I didn't choose, but accepted. I saw patterns I didn't like, habits that were holding me back, and situations I had tolerated for too long. I saw the gap between what I said I wanted and how I was actually living. I could no longer deny the truth. I wasn't leading my life. I was reacting to it. I was letting circumstances decide my direction. That was the day I decided to stop living on autopilot. I took full control of my future today. It didn't come with noise or fanfare. It came with clarity. I sat quietly and thought, if I don't change something now, nothing will change later. The people who win in life aren't just lucky. They take control. They decide. They steer. And I hadn't been steering. I had been drifting. I let days slip by without purpose. I let outside influences shape my thinking. I said yes to too many things that didn't serve my goals. I gave away time, energy, and attention without asking myself if it brought me any closer to who I wanted to be. That realization didn't feel good, but it changed everything. I started by getting specific about what I actually wanted. Not what sounded nice, not what others expected. I asked myself what kind of life I wanted to wake up to. I pictured it in detail. The kind of work that fulfilled me. The kind of health that gave me energy. The kind of people I wanted around me. I wrote it down. I stopped fantasizing and got practical. A future worth living needs a plan. It needs action. It needs direction. So I began mapping out what I had to start doing today to make that life possible. It wasn't complicated, but it required consistency. I made a list of the distractions I had allowed for too long. I stopped saying I didn't have time and started removing the things that wasted it. I adjusted how I started each morning. I stopped waking up in a rush. I gave myself time to think clearly before the noise of the world came in. I reviewed my goals daily, not just to feel inspired, but to remind myself of what mattered. I tracked my progress so I could no longer lie to myself about how serious I was. The more honest I became with my results, the more committed I became to change them. I had to make some tough choices. I walked away from relationships that drained my energy. I reduced my time around people who didn't value growth. I limited conversations that went nowhere. I turned down opportunities that didn't align with my vision. Taking control of your future means having the courage to walk alone when necessary. I stopped waiting for support and decided to become the support I needed. I created structure. I gave my day a rhythm. I added habits that reinforced my commitment. I made my calendar reflect my priorities. I no longer treated my time as if it was unlimited. I focused on learning. I picked up books that challenged my thinking. I studied people who had already done what I was trying to do. I didn't try to reinvent the wheel. I paid attention to patterns. I learned to listen more and speak less. I realized growth is not about speed. It's about direction. I chose long-term thinking over short-term comfort. I made peace with delayed gratification. I wasn't chasing quick wins. I was building a future that would last. Each evening, I reviewed my day, not with judgment, but with awareness. I asked what I did well and what I needed to improve. I didn't let one bad day become two. I learned how to reset fast. I stopped carrying guilt and started using mistakes as lessons. I measured success not just by outcomes, but by effort. Was I better than yesterday? Did I follow through? Did I stay focused? Those were the real markers of progress. And every time I stayed true to my plan, my confidence grew. I started taking responsibility for everything. If I failed, it was mine. If I succeeded, it was because I stayed the course. I stopped blaming traffic, people, background, or chance. I removed the idea of luck from my mindset. I trained myself to act with purpose in everything I did. Whether it was work, rest, or learning, I showed up with intention. I didn't need motivation. I needed structure. I didn't wait to feel like doing it. I simply did it. That's what ownership looks like. Taking control also meant protecting my mental space. I limited what I allowed into my mind. I filtered my inputs. I stopped scrolling aimlessly. I stopped comparing. I focused on building, not watching others build. I gave my attention to what fed my goals. I cut out noise and filled that space with clarity. The more I controlled what I consumed, the stronger my focus became. That mental discipline translated into real results. I looked at money differently. I stopped seeing it as something that ruled me. I started using it as a tool. I tracked every dollar. I planned every expense. I built a system that served me instead of reacting to every financial emergency. I stopped spending emotionally. I started saving consistently. I created boundaries around what I allowed into my financial world. Control over money begins with control over choices. Every time I made a better decision, I felt more capable. I no longer asked what the day would bring. I asked what I would bring to the day. I stopped chasing productivity hacks and focused on consistency. I kept it simple. I worked in blocks. I gave tasks my full attention. I finished what I started. I didn't multitask. I didn't spread myself too thin. I respected my time. And in return, I gained more of it. My results started matching my effort. Not because the world changed, but because I did. The most powerful shift was internal. I started trusting myself again. I didn't need outside approval. I didn't wait for recognition. I knew what I was building. I felt it every day in the choices I made. Taking full control of your future isn't about perfection. It's about direction and discipline. It's about making fewer excuses and taking more action. It's about showing up on the days you don't feel like it. It's about proving to yourself that you are in charge and no one else gets to decide how your story unfolds. Number 5. I stopped blaming others and started owning everything. For a long time, I had a habit of pointing fingers. When things didn't work out, I looked outside myself for a reason. If I didn't get the opportunity I wanted, I blamed the people in charge. If I failed at something, I blamed the timing or the circumstances. If I wasn't moving forward, I blamed the system or my past or how I was raised. It became normal to justify my results by pointing at something or someone other than myself. But deep down, I was tired of the excuses. I was tired of being powerless. Every time I blamed something else, I gave away my control. I made myself a victim of life instead of the leader of it, and that was no way to live. One day, I sat down and looked at where I was. My finances weren't where I wanted them to be. My daily habits were average. My energy was low. My goals were still dreams instead of reality. And I asked myself the toughest question I could face. Whose fault is this? I went silent. There was no one left to blame. The job couldn't carry the weight of my lack of effort. My background couldn't excuse my lack of discipline. My friends weren't responsible for how I used my time. I realized I was looking at the one person who could change everything. Me. That day I drew a line. I stopped blaming others, and I started owning everything. If I was behind in life, it was my responsibility to catch up. If I was stuck in a pattern, it was on me to break it. If I wasn't where I wanted to be, I had to get myself there. I stopped asking who was at fault and started asking what I could do. That shift changed the way I approached everything. I no longer waited for someone to come fix things. I didn't look for sympathy. I looked for solutions. Owning everything meant I had to be honest with myself. I had to admit when I was lazy. I had to admit when I wasted time. I had to admit when I knew better, but still chose the easy way. There's a kind of strength that only comes when you stop hiding from yourself. I didn't make excuses anymore. If I didn't wake up on time, I didn't blame the alarm. If I didn't follow through on a plan, I didn't blame the distractions. I owned the outcome. That ownership started to shape my behavior. I became more focused because I knew I couldn't hide behind blame. I became more intentional because everything now rested on my decisions. I worked harder because no one else was responsible for my success. I planned better because I knew I would have to answer to myself. That kind of thinking doesn't come from outside motivation. It comes from accepting full responsibility for how your life turns out. I stopped talking about what others should do. I stopped waiting for people to change. I shifted my attention to what I could control. I worked on my mindset. I upgraded my habits. I improved my communication. I became more disciplined with my money. I stopped spending like someone else was going to bail me out. I stopped blaming my income and started expanding my skill. I stopped blaming the past and focused on what I could build in the present. There were moments I felt angry, not at others, but at myself. I saw the years I had wasted blaming circumstances. I saw the time I had spent waiting for better conditions instead of becoming a better person. But that frustration became fuel. I used it to take stronger action. I used it to stay committed, even when it was hard. I wasn't looking for perfect situations anymore. I was looking for ways to grow right where I was. I noticed that as I took more ownership, I began to respect myself more. I didn't need to justify my progress to anyone. I knew I was doing the work. I knew I was facing the truth. I knew I was no longer running from my responsibilities. That kind of self-respect is worth more than anything someone else can give you. It doesn't come from applause. It comes from knowing you are not a victim of your life. You are the driver. When problems came up, I didn't panic. I didn't complain. I looked for what I could learn. I asked better questions. I stopped saying, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What can I do with this?" I stopped trying to control people and started working on myself. That change in focus gave me peace. It gave me energy. It gave me results. And the more I did it, the more my life started to reflect that responsibility. I used to think taking ownership meant carrying a burden, but it wasn't a burden. It was a breakthrough. I stopped being stuck in the past. I stopped resenting others for what they did or didn't do. I stopped waiting for perfect timing. I moved forward with what I had. I did the best I could with the resources in front of me. And over time, those resources grew. Not because I waited for someone to help me, but because I helped myself. I started showing up differently. I took pride in my consistency. I became reliable to myself. I stopped making promises I wouldn't keep. I followed through. I stayed committed. I made adjustments instead of giving up. And I did all of that because I no longer needed anyone to blame. If things didn't go my way, I was the one responsible. That truth didn't scare me anymore. It gave me direction. Even in hard seasons, I didn't revert to blame. I reminded myself that ownership doesn't mean everything is your fault. It means everything is your responsibility. You may not cause every challenge, but you are responsible for how you respond. And in that response is your power. In that response is your growth. In that response is the life you create. I kept that standard every day. If I said I'd do it, I did it. If I made a mistake, I admitted it and corrected it. If I fell short, I didn't deny it. I used it as data. I learned. I adapted. I improved. That's how I built momentum, not from perfection, but from personal responsibility. The moment I stopped pointing fingers and started looking inward, my life began to change. Not all at once, but one choice at a time. Each decision reinforced the truth that I was in control, not of everything, but of myself. Number 6, I built strength by facing my financial weakness. There was a point in my life when I could no longer ignore the numbers. The money coming in was never enough. The bills were always more than I expected. I was tired of being behind. I was tired of worrying every time something unexpected happened. I didn't like what I saw when I looked at my financial habits, but I knew pretending wouldn't fix anything. I had to sit down with the truth and accept that I had created this situation by not paying attention, by making poor choices, by avoiding responsibility. I had to face the fact that my weakness with money was costing me not just dollars, but peace, confidence, and progress. For too long, I treated money as something that just happens. I thought as long as I worked hard, the rest would take care of itself. But I learned quickly that working hard doesn't mean much if you don't manage well. I didn't have a system. I didn't have discipline. I wasn't tracking anything. I was earning, but I wasn't building. That gap between effort and outcome began to wear on me. I realized that strength wasn't just about showing up to work. It was about how I handled the results of that work, and I wasn't handling them well. I made the decision to stop hiding from my financial truth. I gathered every bill, every receipt, every transaction. I wanted to see everything I had been ignoring. It was uncomfortable. It was overwhelming, but it was real. I looked at what I owed. I looked at what I was wasting. I looked at the subscriptions I didn't use, the dinners I didn't need, the small purchases that added up to big problems. I stopped telling myself I was okay and started telling myself the truth. I was careless, and that carelessness had created a weight I could no longer carry quietly. That moment of full honesty became the turning point. I committed to learning what I never bothered to understand. I read about budgeting. I studied how people built financial stability. I didn't chase wealth. I chased control. I wanted to feel in charge of my life again. I created a plan. I set limits. I tracked every expense, every dollar earned, every dollar spent. I made cuts that hurt in the short term but helped in the long run. I had to say no to things I used to say yes to, without thinking. But I said yes to something bigger. Peace of mind. Every time I stuck to the plan, I got stronger. Not just in my bank account, but in my thinking. I stopped blaming the cost of living and started looking at how I was living. I stopped looking at others and what they had and focused on building my own foundation. I simplified everything. I prioritized needs over wants. I put small amounts into savings and refused to touch them. I paid off one small debt at a time. I celebrated progress without throwing away the momentum. I didn't wait until I had more money to start managing better. I started managing what I had. Facing my financial weakness also meant dealing with fear. Fear of failure. Fear of admitting I had messed up. Fear of not knowing how long it would take to get out of the hole I was in. But fear can't survive in the presence of action. The more I did, the less I feared. I took responsibility for every choice and accepted that the consequences were mine. That gave me power, because if I could create the problem, I could also create the solution. That shift in mindset made me more focused, more strategic, more determined. I found strength in small victories. A week without overspending. A month of staying on track. The discipline I built in my finances started showing up in other areas. I became more patient. I made better decisions. I thought more clearly. I stopped chasing quick fixes and started building long-term habits. That strength wasn't flashy. It didn't get attention, but it gave me stability. It gave me room to breathe. It gave me confidence I hadn't felt before. People often think strength is about pushing through the big challenges, but real strength is built in the quiet moments, when you do what needs to be done, even when no one's watching. Strength is built when you choose to delay a purchase, because your future matters more than a moment of pleasure. It's built when you open your bank account, even when you're afraid of what you'll see. It's built when you stop pretending and start planning. Every time I chose responsibility over avoidance, I built a little more strength. I realized that money is just a tool. It reveals who you are. If you're careless, it disappears. If you're disciplined, it grows. If you avoid it, it controls you. But if you face it, you control it. I wanted control, not just over my finances, but over my future. And that started with the simple decision to no longer accept weakness as normal. I didn't want to feel powerless anymore. I didn't want to live reactive. I wanted to build, to grow, to lead my life with intention. There were still hard days. Unexpected expenses showed up. Old habits tried to return, but I didn't go back. I remembered what it felt like to live under stress. I remembered how small I felt when I couldn't take care of simple things. I remembered how exhausting it was to pretend I had it together. I wasn't going to let that version of myself run my life again. I had done the work to build something better, and I was going to protect it. I started teaching others what I had learned, not because I was an expert, but because I knew the pain of financial instability. I knew the emotional toll. I wanted others to know that change was possible, that you don't have to be born into wealth to build something meaningful. You just have to be willing to face what you've avoided and commit to something better. I didn't get strong overnight. I got strong by making 1,000 small decisions that no one saw. I got strong by staying consistent, by learning what I didn't know, by asking better questions, by choosing growth over comfort. And every step was worth it, because I no longer feel helpless. I no longer feel like I'm waiting for life to get easier. I've built a foundation. I've earned my strength. And it all started when I faced my weakness, without excuse. Number 7, I promised to outgrow who I used to be. There came a time when I couldn't tolerate who I had been any longer. The version of me that kept putting things off. The one who settled for less. The one who lived in circles and called it progress. I couldn't carry that identity anymore. I had allowed too many days to slip through my hands. I had explained away too many mistakes instead of learning from them. I looked at the gap between who I was and who I could be, and I knew something had to change. I made a promise, a real one. I promised to outgrow who I used to be, not someday, but starting now. That promise wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and private, but it carried weight. I wasn't trying to become someone else. I was trying to become who I knew I should have been all along. I had to outgrow my excuses. I had to outgrow my patterns. I had to outgrow the attitude that said, "This is just how I am." Growth begins when you stop defending your limitations and start building new standards. I decided I wasn't going to keep repeating the same year and calling it experience. I was going to build new habits, new focus, new results. I reviewed my routines. I looked closely at how I started and ended my days. I paid attention to where my time was really going, and I saw it clearly. I had been giving too much attention to things that didn't matter, and not enough to things that did. I was distracted too often, comfortable too often, hesitant too often. I had become a version of myself that tolerated delay, that lived small when I was capable of more. That version had to go, and it wouldn't go on its own. I had to replace it with something stronger. I didn't try to change everything at once. I just committed to doing better than yesterday. I changed how I reacted to setbacks. I no longer saw them as evidence that I wasn't good enough. I saw them as signals that I needed to adjust. I started showing up with intention. I stopped letting my feelings decide how I performed. I made the choice to act based on my promise, not on my mood. That's what maturity looks like. Doing the work even when you don't feel like it. The more I did that, the more I trusted myself. Outgrowing the old me meant I had to let go of comfort. I had to step into situations that stretched me. I had to have uncomfortable conversations, take on new responsibilities, and stop waiting for perfect conditions. Growth doesn't come from staying in the same environment with the same thoughts. I challenged my beliefs. I questioned why I was holding on to ideas that were no longer serving me. I upgraded my mindset by feeding it better input. I listened to people who had done more than me. I read things that didn't entertain me, but educated me. I reminded myself that I didn't know everything, and that's exactly why I needed to grow. There were days I missed the old patterns because they were familiar. It was tempting to go back to what felt easy. But I remembered how frustrated I used to feel. I remembered the regret. I remembered the restless nights, the wasted time, the missed chances. That memory kept me moving. I had tasted the consequences of staying the same, and I didn't want to live there anymore. I wasn't growing just for success. I was growing because I owed it to myself to become someone I could respect. I stopped trying to impress others and focused on becoming proud of who I was becoming. That pride wasn't loud. It came from knowing I was following through. It came from the small wins. Getting up when I said I would. Finishing tasks without complaining. Choosing growth over comfort again and again. The old version of me would have quit when it got hard. The new version stayed in the process. That's how you outgrow the past. Not with talk, but with action. I started keeping my promises, not the big ones, but the daily ones. The promise to finish what I start. The promise to stay consistent. The promise to hold myself accountable. Every day I followed through. I strengthened that new identity. I wasn't just doing things differently. I was becoming someone different. The kind of person who leads, who builds, who rises under pressure. That version of me was always possible, but I had to clear out everything that was holding him back. I simplified my life. I cut out what distracted me. I focused on fewer goals, but with greater depth. I didn't chase everything. I chased what mattered. I gave my energy to things that aligned with the person I wanted to be. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't share my values. I didn't need validation anymore. I needed discipline. I needed clarity. I needed alignment between my actions and my goals. The hardest part was realizing that some of the people around me were comfortable with the old version of me. They didn't want to see me change because it reminded them of their own stagnation. I had to create distance, not out of anger, but out of commitment to my growth. You can't outgrow yourself while staying in the same environment that shaped your limits. I started choosing better influences, people who challenged me, people who lived with standards, people who were also growing. That support helped me keep my momentum when it would have been easy to stop. Growth wasn't loud. It didn't show up overnight. It didn't make headlines. But I could feel it. I could feel it in how I handled conflict. I could feel it in how I used my time. I could feel it in my confidence. Not arrogance. Confidence built on proof. Proof that I was following through. Proof that I was rising. Proof that I was finally becoming someone I wouldn't have recognized just a year before. That's the reward of growth. It's not just what you achieve. It's who you become while achieving it. I didn't need to wait for a crisis to change. I didn't need to hit rock bottom. I just needed to make a decision. A real one. A decision to no longer accept what I had outgrown. A decision to move forward, even when it was inconvenient. A decision to choose strength over comfort. That decision had to be made every day. Not just once, but the more I made it, the more natural it became. Every time I slipped into old habits, I reminded myself of the promise to outgrow who I used to be. I wasn't in competition with anyone else. I was only trying to outdo my last version. I wanted to keep building, keep stretching, keep rising. And no matter what challenges came my way, I knew I wouldn't go back. I had made too much progress. I had come too far. I had become someone I didn't want to lose. Number 8, I turned shame into fuel for massive action. Shame is a powerful emotion. It can freeze you in place, or it can push you forward. For a long time, I let shame keep me stuck. I felt embarrassed about my mistakes, my failures, and the parts of my life I wasn't proud of. I hid from the truth because facing it hurt too much. But then I realized that shame only controls you if you let it. The moment I stopped running from it and started facing it, everything changed. I made a decision to turn shame into fuel for massive action. Instead of letting it weigh me down, I used it to lift myself up. Feeling ashamed is natural. When you look at where you've fallen short, maybe you failed at a goal. Maybe you made bad decisions. Maybe you let people down. I know those feelings well. I've been there. It's uncomfortable, and it makes you want to hide. But hiding only makes the problem grow. I understood that the only way out was through. I stopped avoiding my shame and began to examine it. I asked myself what I could learn from it, what I could change because of it, and how I could grow beyond it. That shift turned shame from a prison into a classroom. That feeling of shame became a reminder of where I refused to stay. It became a signal that I needed to take action. I didn't want to keep living with regret or excuses. I didn't want to be defined by my past failures. So I decided to do something different. I used the energy of shame to start working harder, smarter, and with more focus. Every time shame tried to drag me down, I reminded myself that I had a choice. Stay stuck or move forward. I chose to move. Massive action doesn't mean rushing without thought. It means being intentional and consistent. It means setting clear goals and working steadily toward them, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. Shame taught me that I couldn't wait for perfect conditions or for motivation to strike. I had to create my own momentum. I had to get up every day and do the work, even when I didn't feel like it. That's what turns shame into fuel. When you stop feeling sorry for yourself and start doing something about it. I started by identifying the areas where shame was strongest. It might have been my finances, my health, my relationships, or my career. I didn't sugarcoat it or pretend it wasn't real. I wrote down exactly what I wasn't proud of. Then I made a plan. That plan wasn't complicated. It was clear and practical. It had small steps I could take immediately. I broke down my goals into daily actions. That way shame lost its power, because I was replacing it with progress. The power of shame is that it's honest. It shows you what you've been avoiding. But that honesty is only useful if you accept it and act on it. I learned to embrace the discomfort. I stopped looking for quick fixes. I stopped blaming others for my situation. I took responsibility for my life and my choices. That responsibility was uncomfortable at first, but it made me stronger. It made me more resilient. It made me less afraid of failure. Turning shame into fuel also meant changing how I talked to myself. Instead of beating myself up, I started speaking to myself like a coach. I acknowledged my mistakes, but focused on solutions. I reminded myself that everyone fails sometimes. What matters is what you do after failure. That shift in mindset was critical. It helped me stay consistent. It helped me keep taking action, even when I felt tired or discouraged. I also surrounded myself with people who supported my growth. I stopped spending time with those who made me feel worse about myself. I found mentors, friends, and colleagues who encouraged me and held me accountable. Their belief in me gave me extra strength when my own confidence wavered. That community helped me see that shame didn't have to be a life sentence. It could be a starting point for something better. Every time I took action fueled by shame, I built momentum. Small wins led to bigger wins. Confidence replaced doubt. I started achieving things I once thought were impossible. But the most important change wasn't external. It was internal. I no longer feared shame because I knew I was using it to grow. I was no longer defined by my past mistakes. I was defined by my determination to improve and move forward. That journey wasn't easy. Shame is stubborn, and it doesn't disappear overnight. But the more I used it as fuel, the less power it had to hold me back. I learned that feeling ashamed is a signal, not a stop sign. It's a call to action, not a reason to quit. Every time I felt shame, I reminded myself that it was an opportunity to prove to myself that I was stronger than my past. I stopped avoiding what was difficult. I faced my weaknesses and worked on them. I didn't wait for permission or encouragement. I gave myself permission to grow. I celebrated progress, no matter how small. I refused to let shame rob me of my future. Instead, I used it to build a future that made me proud. Turning shame into fuel taught me one of the most important lessons about growth. It's not about never failing or never feeling bad. It's about using every feeling, every experience, every setback as a reason to push harder. It's about making the choice to act instead of retreating. When shame became my fuel, I stopped running from my past and started building my future. That change in perspective created unstoppable momentum. It helped me keep moving when the path got tough. It made me more accountable, more focused, and more resilient. Shame no longer controlled me. I controlled my response to it. That's where real strength comes from. Choosing action when it would be easier to give up. Number 9. I realize success starts with a painful truth. Success is rarely a comfortable journey. The moment I realized this was also the moment my life began to shift in ways I never expected. The truth I had to face was painful, but it was necessary. I had been chasing success without looking at what was really holding me back. I wanted results, but I wasn't willing to admit the hard facts about myself and my situation. I had to confront the truth that if I wanted to succeed, I had to see things as they were, not as I wished they were. The painful truth was simple, but difficult. I was responsible for my lack of progress. No one else was stopping me. No circumstances were to blame. I had been blaming everything around me. My job, my family, my background. But the real obstacle was me. I wasn't working hard enough. I wasn't disciplined. I wasn't consistent. I wasn't learning fast enough. I was avoiding the difficult work. That realization hit me hard because it meant I couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. Facing this truth brought discomfort. I felt exposed. I felt vulnerable, but I also felt the stirrings of hope. If the problem was me, then I was also the solution. That meant I had the power to change my path. I could stop being a victim of my circumstances and become the architect of my future. That power came with responsibility, and I was ready to take it on, even though it wasn't easy. The moment I accepted that success begins with this kind of honesty, I stopped looking for shortcuts. I stopped hoping for easy wins. I began to see that every successful person I admired had faced their own painful truths. They didn't succeed because the road was smooth. They succeeded because they accepted the hard reality of their situation and decided to take action anyway. That acceptance was the foundation of all progress. I had to develop new habits that matched this truth. I learned to face my weaknesses instead of pretending they didn't exist. I stopped avoiding the work that felt uncomfortable. I set goals that required me to stretch beyond what was familiar. I didn't give myself permission to quit when things got tough. I began to measure my progress honestly, not through hope or wishful thinking, but through consistent effort and results. The process was often humbling. I made mistakes. I failed more than I wanted to admit, but I kept going. I learned that failure isn't the enemy. Denial is. Ignoring your shortcomings will keep you stuck. Facing them will set you free. The painful truth showed me where I needed to improve. It exposed the areas where I was weak, but it also gave me clarity. When you know exactly where the problem lies, you can start fixing it. This truth helped me build resilience. I stopped expecting life to be fair. I stopped waiting for motivation to magically appear. I learned that success requires sacrifice. It demands patience. It requires consistency. I accepted that there would be days when progress felt invisible. I accepted that growth isn't always exciting, but I also accepted that the painful truth was a necessary step toward everything I wanted. The shift in mindset made a big difference. I started taking ownership of my choices. I stopped blaming others for my failures. Instead, I asked better questions. What can I do better? How can I improve? What habits am I willing to change? Those questions kept me focused on the things I could control. And when you focus on what you can control, success becomes less about luck and more about effort. I found that success was less about talent and more about persistence. It was less about luck and more about showing up every day with the intention to improve. The painful truth taught me that success is built on a foundation of discipline and honesty. Without those, dreams remain just dreams. With them, dreams become plans, and plans become reality. The journey wasn't easy. I faced setbacks that tested my commitment. I encountered distractions that threatened to pull me off course, but the painful truth anchored me. It reminded me why I started. It reminded me that I was capable of more than I had allowed myself to believe. It gave me a clear reason to keep going when the road got rough. Looking back, I see that the moment I faced that painful truth was a turning point. It was the moment I stopped wishing and started working. It was the moment I stopped blaming and started owning. It was the moment I stopped dreaming and started doing. That truth set a standard for me. I wasn't going to settle for anything less than my best effort. I wasn't going to hide behind excuses. I was going to keep pushing until I achieved the success I wanted. This lesson isn't easy to accept, but it's one of the most valuable anyone can learn. Success doesn't start with luck or opportunity. It starts with a clear-eyed look at where you are and what you need to do to get where you want to be. It starts with courage. The courage to face your shortcomings and take action anyway. That's where true growth happens. That's where success begins. Number 10. I committed to grow beyond my current limits. There was a moment when I realized that if I stayed where I was, I would never reach the life I dreamed about. The walls of my comfort zone were closing in, and I knew something had to change. I made a commitment to myself, a commitment to grow beyond my current limits. This wasn't about just trying harder. It was about changing who I was willing to become. Growth demands pushing past what feels safe and familiar, and I decided I was ready for that challenge. Limits are often invisible until you test them. I had to learn that the boundaries I believed in were mostly self-imposed. Fear, doubt, and old habits kept me small, but they weren't facts. I had accepted too many limitations as permanent, thinking I couldn't do more or be more. That thinking kept me stuck. Changing that mindset meant seeing limits as temporary and flexible. It meant understanding that growth requires discomfort. I couldn't stay inside what I knew if I wanted to get somewhere new. Committing to growth beyond my limits required honesty. I had to face the truth about where I was in my life, what habits were holding me back, and what beliefs were limiting me. That was not easy. I realized I had been making excuses for why I couldn't do certain things. I told myself stories about what was possible and what wasn't. But deep down, I knew those stories were just fears, dressed up as facts. To grow, I had to rewrite those stories with the truth of what I could achieve if I put in the work. That commitment changed how I approached every day. Instead of waiting for motivation, I created my own momentum. I set clear goals that challenged me, not just comfortable goals. I stopped settling for small wins that didn't move me forward. I started tracking progress in ways that mattered. Every morning, I reminded myself that growth meant taking steps I didn't always want to take. Sometimes that meant working harder. Sometimes it meant learning something new. Sometimes it meant saying no to distractions. But every step was a step beyond my old limits. Growth demanded new skills. I invested time in learning, reading books, listening to mentors, practicing new habits. I stopped thinking I could figure everything out on my own. I reached out for guidance. I embraced the idea that becoming better requires continuous learning. When I stumbled or failed, I didn't give up. I saw those moments as signals that I was growing. Mistakes weren't signs of failure. They were proof I was pushing beyond what was easy. This commitment also required patience. Growth is not instant. It's a steady process that builds over time. I had to learn to trust the process, even when results weren't immediate. That was difficult because I had a tendency to want quick wins. But true growth isn't about speed. It's about consistency. I learned that small daily improvements add up to big changes. Staying consistent in my actions was the difference between getting stuck and moving forward. Facing limits also meant facing fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown. I stopped letting fear decide my future. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of fear. I began to welcome discomfort as a sign that I was growing. Every time I felt uneasy, I reminded myself that growth lives there. That mindset helped me push past excuses and resistance. Committing to grow beyond my limits reshaped my identity. I no longer saw myself as someone defined by past failures or limitation. I saw myself as a work in progress, someone capable of change and improvement. That self-image gave me strength. It fueled my persistence. It helped me handle setbacks without giving up. I became more flexible and open-minded. I stopped trying to prove myself to others and focused on proving it to myself. Surrounding myself with supportive people was part of this commitment. I found individuals who challenged me, encouraged me, and held me accountable. I distanced myself from those who doubted my growth or wanted me to stay the same. Growth requires environment. You can't push beyond your limits if everything around you is pushing you back. The people I chose to spend time with inspired me to reach higher and work harder. This commitment impacted every part of my life. It changed how I handled relationships, work, and challenges. I became more proactive. I stopped waiting for permission or perfect timing. I created opportunities instead of waiting for them. I became solution-focused instead of problem-focused. I stopped making excuses for why I couldn't do something and started asking how I could do it. That shift opened doors I didn't even know existed. Even when progress felt slow, I kept my promise. I remembered that growth is a journey, not a destination. There would be times when I wanted to give up, but the commitment I made kept me going. I focused on what I could control: my effort, my attitude, my consistency. I celebrated every step forward, no matter how small. That celebration kept my energy high and my motivation alive. Committing to grow beyond my current limits taught me that potential isn't fixed. It's something you unlock with effort, courage, and time. Limits aren't walls. They're challenges to overcome. The biggest obstacles often live in our mind. When I pushed past my mental limits, everything else became possible. I became more capable, more confident, more resilient. I stopped being afraid of what I couldn't do and started focusing on what I could learn. That promise to grow beyond my limits was a turning point. It wasn't about becoming perfect. It was about becoming better than I was yesterday. It was about refusing to settle for less than I was capable of. It was about showing up for myself every day with the intention to improve. Growth became a habit, a lifestyle, a commitment I would never break. No matter what challenges came, I held that promise tight. I kept pushing forward because I knew the life I wanted was on the other side of my limits. I wasn't defined by where I started. I was defined by where I was willing to go. That commitment became the foundation of everything I built. And every day I choose to grow, I get closer to the person I am meant to be.